Something's not right at Mercedes. At least, not if you ask Ferrari, Honda, or Audi. Because today, as the W17 breaks cover for the first time, with its narrow body, silver-black livery, and Microsoft backing, the talk isn't just about the car. It's about the engine inside it, and the advantage it could bring. Because behind closed doors, rival teams have filed formal protests. They're accusing Mercedes of designing a power unit that's technically legal, but only if you never start the engine. And according to insiders, even James Allison has raised internal concerns about what comes next. But before we get there, we need to understand exactly what Mercedes has done. Because this might be the most controversial power unit since Ferrari 2019. And this time, the FIA might not intervene in time. January 22, 2026. Silverstone. The weather is cold, wet, unpredictable. But what Mercedes unveils today is anything but uncertain. This isn't just another car launch. This is the W17. A fully operational, regulation-compliant 2026 machine. Not a teaser, not a mock-up, not a showpiece for sponsors. Russell and Antonelli split the track time during the shakedown. Not for performance, but for systems, reliability, and early signals. And from the first moment it rolls out, the paddock knows. This isn't for show. Mercedes is ahead of schedule. And they're not hiding it anymore. What they are hiding is everything else. No diffuser. No side pod geometry. No exposed aero philosophy. Just a narrow silhouette, wrapped in silver and black. And painted with the confidence of a team that's building something serious. But that's not what people are talking about. They're talking about what's inside the car. And what might be just outside the limits of the rulebook. Because while Mercedes is showcasing their polished, confident image, somewhere else, behind closed doors, FIA officials are meeting with Ferrari, Honda, and Audi. All three have filed formal protests over the engine. And Mercedes knows it. They've timed this launch down to the hour. A public statement, wrapped in chrome, on the very day their rivals try to shut them down. This is no longer just about car design. This is a political war. One where the first shot wasn't fired on the track, but in a technical document buried inside FIA regulations. And right now, the question isn't whether Mercedes is fast enough to win. It's whether they've done something too clever to be stopped. At first, it sounded like a rumor. The kind that always appears before a regulation change. Whispers in the paddock. Quiet conversations between engineers who suddenly stop talking when someone walks in. But this one didn't go away. It centered on one number. 16:1. The maximum compression ratio allowed for 2026. On paper, Mercedes is compliant. Perfectly compliant. Every measurement, every static test, every FIA procedure, passed. And that's exactly where the discomfort begins. Because the rule only specifies how compression is measured when the engine is cold. Engine off. Ambient temperature. A static snapshot of something that never exists on track. What happens when the engine is running? When metal expands? When tolerances close? That's not explicitly covered. According to sources familiar with the design philosophy, Mercedes may have leaned into that gap. Not by breaking the rule, but by letting physics do the work. Thermal expansion isn't new. Every engine does it. But designing components so that, under race temperatures, the combustion chamber effectively tightens, that's a choice. A deliberate one. Rivals noticed it during internal benchmarking. Not because Mercedes said anything, but because the numbers didn't add up. Energy deployment curves looked too strong. Fuel efficiency didn't match expectations. And lap time simulations started drifting into uncomfortable territory. That's when Ferrari asked questions. Honda followed. Audi didn't like the answers. And this is where the official narrative starts to crack. Because if the engine is only legal when it's cold, what exactly is it when it's racing? And more importantly, who decides when that line has been crossed? This is the part that makes the FIA uncomfortable. Because the problem isn't whether the engine is illegal. It's that the rules don't know how to say it is. Compression ratio is tested by protocol. Room temperature. Engine off. Volume measured. Ratio defined. Simple. But the sport doesn't live in that environment. Cars race under stress. Heat. Load. Expansion. Everything changes after the lights go out. And Mercedes knows this. Which is why they didn't design an engine to pass a test. They designed one to change after the test. Internally, some engineers are calling it dynamic legality. A system that's technically compliant at inspection, but transforms once the system reaches operating conditions. It's elegant. It's genius. And it might break the 2026 rules before the season even begins. But here's the problem. If the FIA lets this pass, they can't walk it back. Engine homologation locks performance for the season. No upgrades. No corrections. No swaps. If Mercedes gets it through now, they keep it, even if other teams complain for the next 22 races. That's why rivals are panicking. And that's also why the FIA is stalling. Because to block this, they'd need to redefine what legal means. Not in terms of the written regulation, but in terms of intent. And that's a slippery slope. Because once you start interpreting intent, you can unravel the entire regulatory structure of Formula One. And quietly, this is where James Allison comes into focus. According to insiders, he's not fully convinced. Not because it's illegal, but because it's too perfect. He knows what happens when innovation gets too far ahead of governance. It invites chaos. And Mercedes, right now, might be standing on that edge. The issue isn't compression. It's precedent. Because once the FIA accepts this interpretation, they set a trap for themselves. They open the door to a new kind of war. Not on track, but in the margins of thermal tolerances and mechanical expansion. Every manufacturer sees the same thing. If Mercedes gets away with this, they'll have no choice but to follow. Not because they want to, but because they'll be left behind if they don't. And here's why that matters. The 2026 regulations were meant to bring balance. 50-50 power split. Greater reliance on electric deployment. Cleaner racing. Smaller margins between factory teams and newcomers. That balance is already fragile. But if Mercedes resets it before the first race, the entire grid shifts. Honda is already threatening to delay its final engine spec. Ferrari wants the FIA to issue a technical directive before Bahrain. And Audi, who entered this era on the promise of regulatory clarity, is now exploring legal review mechanisms. Because from their perspective, this isn't innovation. It's manipulation. Smart, quiet, legal, but still manipulation. And there's one more problem the FIA doesn't want to admit. They helped cause this. They wrote the rule. They set the test conditions. They left the door open. And now, Mercedes has walked through it. Some inside the FIA believe they can't close it without admitting fault. Others argue it's better to let it run for one season. Then fix it in 2027 quietly, without scandal. But the teams? They're not waiting. And the paddock is starting to fracture. Not over who's fastest, but over who controls the rules now. If the FIA stays silent, Mercedes could lock in a performance advantage that no one else can touch. Because this engine, the RA126H, isn't built to win every race. It's built to win early. To create a gap. To force the rest of the field into a corner. Think about it. In 2026, engine specs are frozen. No upgrades. No redesigns. Once it's homologated, it's done. Which means if Mercedes gets the first 3 races right, they could carry that momentum into the summer. Before anyone else figures out how to close the gap. They don't need to dominate. They just need to control the pace. 0.3 seconds a lap. Over a full race distance, that's a margin too large for strategy to erase. Especially with limited battery deployment and fixed energy recovery protocols. And that's what makes this so dangerous. Because even if the FIA does step in, even if they try to patch the rule or issue a clarification, the season could already be shaped. Constructors' points banked. Championship dynamics distorted. We've seen this before. In 2014, Mercedes arrived with a power unit that changed everything. By the time rivals caught up, it was 2017. This could be the same pattern. Not because of horsepower, but because of timing. And here's the part the paddock hates to admit. This is exactly how Mercedes wins. Not by being 1 second faster, but by being half a step ahead. At the one moment no one else is looking. So here we are. Mercedes has unveiled their car. Their engine is running. And the stopwatch says they're on pace. But no one's relaxed. Not inside the team. Not inside the FIA. And definitely not inside the other engine manufacturers. Because if this loophole holds, it rewrites the next 12 months. And even if it gets closed, too late, the damage is still done. Every team is now rereading the rulebook. Not for performance, but for weakness. And that's where the real shift begins. Because Formula One has always lived in the gray areas. But 2026 was supposed to be different. The FIA promised clarity. A reset. An era of clean racing, sustainable technology, and competitive balance. But what Mercedes may have done, intentionally or not, is prove that clarity doesn't exist. Not when the rules can't see what happens at 1000 degrees Celsius. Not when legality depends on temperature and timing. And that brings us to the part no one wants to say out loud. What happens if this isn't the only trick? What if the RA126H is just the start? Because when you combine quiet engineering, political silence, and a team that's already used this playbook before, it's not hard to imagine a future where Mercedes isn't just winning races. They're shaping the rulebook while doing it. And if that's what's happening now, then this engine controversy might only be the opening move in something much, much bigger.